Alright mate, no worries. I've just got to review this QNAP. It's 1655. I'll see you in about 10 minutes, alright? Should be a quick one. What? Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today we're going to review this, the massive TS-1655 from QNAP. This is kind of the desktop answer to rack mount for a lot of users, and although it is not the first 12/16 bay solution from the brand, this is one that I think does a better job than some of their more recent releases to kind of consolidate file enterprise kind of transit for a number of reasons. And although it's not perfect, some stuff that I'll talk about later on that does irk me a little bit about this device, I will say that there are things about this device that I'm genuinely pleased that QNAP have integrated into this kind of up and coming series from them of combination hard drive and SSD systems. But a few disclaimers straight off the bat. First and foremost, yes, I've had to move a lot of things around to get this bad boy on the desk and in shot. Indeed, occasionally the top of my head is almost certainly going to disappear into the sky. I've also had to move the mic here, so try as I might, I'll try not to bang the system too much close to the mic, but I apologise in advance if some of that makes it through. Next disclaimer, you may have noticed I've already unboxed it. Normally in these videos I'd love to show you an unboxing, but I can barely get the unit in on its own. But to give you a quick rundown, the box is absolutely huge. It is significantly bigger than the unit. It is branded inside. It's 2 layers of cardboard. It has a horrific amount of protection inside a skeleton foam structure. I'm pretty sure it could survive most things other than forklift truck arms piercing the side of it. Last thing I'm going to touch on is there isn't going to be much in the way of software coverage on this system. I'll go into more detail about it later on. But the main reason for it is I do not have currently in the studio this much media to test this device, and I could chuck in a couple of SATAs in there and show you the OS, but I've done that in other videos, and you can check that out in my other QTS and QuTS reviews that have come out in the last 6 to 7 months. And also, this system is very bespoke insofar as, probably bespoke's the wrong word, it's better designed for those that are looking for raw internal throughput and the option of how to scale that externally. And although they're probably going to benefit from the range of QNAP's own first-party applications, I would argue that most users that buy this are barely going to use a handful of them, with the exception of those that are specifically tailored towards ZFS, because this is an ext4 and ZFS system. So rather than doing the software overview in its entirety like I've done in other reviews, I am going to skim over it a little bit later in the video, and I'm going to ask you guys, when I have got some media coming for this, hopefully in the next 2 weeks, that you can let me know in the comments the test that you want to see. Because right now, in its current state, I could chuck in 4 10 TB Ultra Stars. I've got some 14 TB Seagates over there from other reviews. But frankly, this would tie up most of my available kind of testing media just to run this system. And with all these different NASs that I've got to test at the moment, it just wouldn't work. So let me know in the comments what you want to see. But let's crack straight on. Probably shouldn't do that so close to the mic. So first and foremost, the 1655 knocks around in the UK for 1,999 nicker. In the US, it's 2,400 nicker, and in the bulk of Europe, supporting the euro, it is 2,450 euros there. So right now, when you do look at the hardware spec, you may be forgiven for thinking, a couple of grand, that's quite a lot of money. What is this giving you that a standard class 6 bay for about £1,000, an 8 bay for about 1,200, 1,500, and if you go for a rack mount, you're probably looking at 2.5, 3. What makes this stand out from the crowd, other than the obvious that it is rack mount scale storage in a desktop form factor? Well, I've already touched on one of those details there, and that is that this system is ZFS enabled. It arrives with the choice of ext4 or ZFS when you roll it off you roll it straight out the gate in initialization. Now, what does that mean in real terms? Number one, you are talking about with this sheer scale of storage, you can embrace some of those ZFS RAID configurations. Not just a triple parity RAID, but on top of that, you've got things like much faster RAID building, RAID resyncs, RAID resilvering. Then, of course, you've got the removal of the volume layer that's associated with with ZFS, and therefore you are writing directly onto the pool. Alternatively, if you do go for the ext4 option, again, we'll talk more about ZFS later, then you can take advantage of QTier. Another thing that this system, I would argue, is very, very specialized for those of you that want to create a single storage pool with its own internally managed hot, warm and cold levels of storage all within. But for now, what you get for your money when you unbox the device, because I've already done it for you. First and foremost, you've got your accessories. There's a huge amount to write home about here. You've got screws. I've already unscrewed this chassis because later on we're going to talk about the internal hardware. So you'll get these, but generally they are attached to the system. On top of that, you've got information on your warranty. It arrives with 3 years of manufacturer's warranty that can be extended to 5. Quick start installation guide, you can largely ignore that. The online resources are better. We've got screws for 2.5 inch, a 3.5 inch media as well, and there's additional screws as well, again, in case you want to use the main base for 2.5 inch or 3.5 inch, but obviously these are dedicated. But I will highlight, and you'll see it later on in the video, that you can use just click and load toolless installation if you choose. There's also heat sinks for the M2 NVMe base that are inside, but the M2 NVMe base inside this, there's only 2 of them in there, and later on you'll see why I've got a bit of a chip on my shoulder about those bays. We've also got a mains power lead. This has got an internal PSU 550 watt, and that PSU has got additional connectors on board for GPU cards and stuff like that, but we'll talk about that more in the internal hardware section. Keys to lock all of the individual bays, and a single Cat5e cable there. So you've got your connectivity. And again, we'll talk about connectivity later on. And I feel like I'm being overly negative because one of the things with this box is, had this been released about a year ago, I would have been a lot kinder to it than I'm going to be in this video. And I do like it. I do like the 1655. But ever since the 7.4 series arrived with its Intel Core processor there, and with some of those arriving like an i9 or 10 GBE on board and PCIe Gen 4 architecture, this has seemingly arrived with its biggest rival coming from the company itself, with a number of those solutions arriving at between 1,500 and 3 grand, and this arriving bang straight there in the middle at 2. We've got to talk a little bit more about the design of this and what makes this stand out over others. So let's talk a little bit about that design. Obviously on the front there we've already made out it is technically a 16 bay device. You have got 12 bays of SATA drive storage here that support up to the latest 22 TB drives. 24 TB is just around the corner, and you've got additional SSD bays connected via SATA. It's a shame they're not U2, but again 2 grand, I'm going to stop complaining, and those support up to 15mm height SATA SSD, so you can get some decent storage drives there. Now, looking at QNAP's own website, we can see that right now, according to their own website, this supports up to 308 terabytes of storage in a pool maximum. Now, there's no word on whether that in the QuTS platform, but given ZFS, it shouldn't really be the case, you know. But at least in the ext4, that is definitely the case. But if you were to fully populate this with 22 TB drives, and you were to take these and fill them with 8 TB drives, that's still, according to my calculations, only going to give you 296 terabytes of storage in that raw storage pool. Suddenly, that 308 TB max pool, not a huge concern now, is it? Now, as far as volumes go, it supports up to 250 TB volumes, but again, bear in mind, there's a question mark on whether that's QTS or QuTS, depending on what you choose for this system. There is, for each one of these, the inside, you can see a direct. Let's bring a few out, actually. It's going to be easier to show you. Again, I apologise for how close to the mic this is right now. But you can see inside, it's directly connected via SATA connectors there at the back. There's no loose cables. That means this system is not going to have loose wires, and it goes directly into ventilation, and there's several fans on the rear of the system. Talking of, you know, the several fans on this system and cooling, is not going to be the quietest device. It's a metal chassis, that many drives, and particularly if you exceed the likes of 8 to 10 TB, anything higher than that, those drives are going to make a lot of noise when they're in operation. So don't think just because you avoided getting hold of a rack mount device and you've gone desktop that you are being saved from noise, because this device is a rack mount in desktop clothing. It is very much a rack mount that just happens to be a bit more portable on your desk and taking up a bit less real estate. So don't think you're overlooking that noise factor. Now, the individual SATA SSD bays, if we have a look at one of those, as mentioned, are click and load. There's screw holes if you wish to install drives in a specific way to hold them in place, but these are pretty good trays. We've seen them before. They hold it in place. Indeed, the only reason they're that long, they don't support MUX boards, but because they've got to interact with the same deep interface as the 3.5-inch drives, they've got to be that much longer. Indeed, if you look at the 3.5-inch drive bays there, it's exactly the same concept, screws in there, and again, they're not spring-loaded, but they are lockable there on the front. And when you do install drives in this, again, you can choose to populate it with just a handful of drives if you choose, or fully populate the device and make one giant storage pool if you choose with, you know, RAID 5, RAID 6 or RAID Z with triple parity if you choose. On top of that, you can create multiple storage pools and indeed one big storage pool and multiple storage volumes on there. If you choose to go with the ext4 file system as your QuTS on this, then you can create maybe a RAID that takes advantage of the 8 bays at the bottom, and then you can expand that RAID later with more drives. That's not as straightforward when it comes to the RAID with RAID handling in QuTS or ZFS, where expansion of existing RAID doesn't really work the same. You can't add on drives. You can bolt on additional pools of drives within the same group, but it's not really the same as standard expansion of a RAID. Now, again, going back to ext4, I touched on it. You've got support of QTier. Now, QTier, I think, is one of the few reasons why you wouldn't opt for ZFS on this system, because QTier, what it does is combine and merge all of the storage media into one giant storage pool. Now, that storage pool is made up of the hard drives that, you know, traditionally slower but larger capacity and more affordable hard drives, and faster but lower capacity and more expensive SSDs. And as you access data regularly, you and your other users, the more frequently accessed or frequently requested data is intelligently by the system moved, not copied like caching, moved over to the SSDs. And therefore, if you want to go one step further and combine it with a third tier, such as when people use SATA SAS and SSDs all in one combination, you can actually create that triple area, and the system intelligently learns about the difference between the needed cold, warm and hot storage there. So you don't get that option in ZFS with the storage on this. What you do get is inline deduplication, and deduplication is when data is being sent to the device by multiple sources that's exactly the same, such as OSs and team folders and stuff, and the system intelligently learns that that data already exists, so it creates one copy and then keeps a record of everyone that needs the backup copy of that data. Then you've got inline compression, which is when data has been sent to the system automatically compresses it on the fly. And finally, inline data compaction, which is particularly good for SSDs to preserve their life as data is being sent in. It logically makes sure, much like a live defragmentation, but in reverse, make sure to take up as little space as possible within the system. Also, it's worth highlighting again, you can expand this in several ways, but unlike RAID expansion by adding more drives in ext4, both ext4 and the ZFS platform support the myriad of QNAP expansion chassis. Now, these arrive in 2, 4, 8, 12 and 16 bay expansions in desktop and rack mount. Those expansions are hardware RAID if you choose in the TR series. They are unrated at all in JBOD in the TL series. There's even expansions as big as this that arrive with SAS cards that, with the external SAS or HD stash 12 gig on those expansions connected to the card that you pop inside this that's included with the expansion, can give you transfer speeds between the expansion and the NAS for like 5,000 or more megabytes per second. That is Trey-bot, beautiful stuff there. But of course with the JBODs, this system's managing that RAID there. Also on the front of the design of the chassis there, we've got an LCD to give you real-time information about the device. We've got a USB port for one-touch copy and stuff, but it's USB 3.2 Gen 1, 5 gig. Really disappointing given there's so much 10 gig USB floating around on the QNAP platform there. The ventilation is going to be a big deal on this, because much like the reason why rack mounts make an absolute insoluble racket, this device is relying on horizontal airflow. It's got the fans and there's no vent on the side. There's nothing on either side of this device in terms of ventilation or on the top. There's vents at the base for 8 of those bays, but that's your lot. Ventilation, as you'll see later on, is from the rear fans on this device that is drawing air over all of the individual components, and indeed almost a third, I'd say like maybe 30% at the front of this chassis is this enormous vent bay. And in that vent bay are the primary internal hardware components, as well as some expansion and upgradable areas and just active airflow running over a series of heat sinks internally. The design of this, for a desktop, and I'm sorry if my voice is bouncing off the metal there, I like the design on this to step away from that rack mount to get into a desktop form, but this is as good as they can make it to get that much storage into a desktop cube of storage. And to get ZFS included in this as a pre-built turnkey system is going to appeal to a lot of users out there. And the internal performance possible with that many bays is going to be absolutely excellent. But external performance is what a lot of you are going to care about. And that's something, sadly, has wound me up the wrong way about this device. So let's talk about those external connections. Now, the ports and connections on this device are actually pretty few and far between. Mainly, the default ones come down to that, and that. We've already talked about the PSU there, that 550 watt one there. And if we bring this closer to camera, you're able to see that we've got some additional USB ports there at the bottom. And those USB ports, well, again, USB 3.2 Gen 1, they're all 5 gig. You're going to use them for expansions. Mainly you'll use them for UPSs in this. I can't imagine you'll assign them to like VMs too much, to be perfectly honest with you. We've got those big old ventilating fans there on the rear, pulling air over all of those internal components quite effectively. But again, it's going to make a bit of a racket. We've got network interface ports there. And again, let's maybe dwell on that just a little bit, because straight off the bat, I'm pleased they're not 1 GBE. Frankly, any device with 1 GBE right now that's considered prosumer, considered, Home Plus, considered business or SMB, as far as I'm concerned, if it doesn't have at least 2.5 GBE or 10 GBE, I'm already going to mark you down for that one. So it's good they've included 2.5 GBE in 2 ports. So again, multipath, port trunking, link aggregation, it's supported on there. But with this much storage, I'm kind of bummed out one of them ain't the 10G, or at least 10G by default. Now, I get it. The 16-bay series from QNAP has spanned numerous versions over the years. We've seen ones that are Xeon powered. We've seen the Xeon W powered ones there. We've seen the ARM-based powered ones there. Some more cost-effective ones. I think the 1655, I might be wrong there. There's lots of different versions of this chassis from QNAP, and several of them have arrived with 10 GBE on board there, but they've either been super enterprise 3 to 5 grand jobs, or they've been ARM-based processors and they've attached on lower end controller SFP modules on there because of those ARM controllers, and therefore, even though you've got all the storage, you've got CPU that maybe can't count all of that performance. This, on the other hand, has got a great little Intel CPU inside that I'm going to talk about, and also it's got all of those storage bays in there. So this is a system that is crying out for at least 10 gig. Realistically, 25G, a couple of 10Gs, fiber channel, that kind of stuff. This is ready for that. And as this scale of storage would imply, as far as I'm concerned, it should be a system that is better suited to, high capacity storage for either multi-site operations or one site that's got a lot of data being sent to it all the time, whether it is a backup to an existing one or vice versa. This is a big scale operation for data. So throttling it to 2.5 GBE by default bums me out a little bit. Yes, as we'll talk about in a moment, you can upgrade it, but 2.5 GBE, by default, given the cost of 10 GBE these days, just up the price another 100 nicker. Just do that. Add 10 GBE. Don't make it an optional extra on a system that is clearly going to be scaled up to 10G by the majority of users on day one. But talking of scaling up, this has got 3 PCIe upgrade slots there. Again, it doesn't look like there's 3, but there is 3 in there. It's double-sided, and all of those are PCIe to 3 times 4. So 4,000 megabytes per second upgradability there with each one of those, meaning a dual-port 10 GBE card. You can go for some of those fiber channel cards there, 25 GBE. QM2 combo cards that have got M2 NVMe slots and 10 GBE on there, and there's even those M2 dedicated cards that have got 2 and 4 M2 NVMe bays on there, with those M2 NVMe's being usable as caching, being utilized within QTier, or as standalone storage pools. You can run apps at the entire OS from them if you want. So the scalability on those PCI upgrade slots are fantastic for me there, and having 3 of them really gives me a lot to play with. And the fact that this has got M2 NVMe slots by default anyway means I don't have to use up a card slot just to have access to a couple of M2 NVMe's that I might want to run the QuTS ZFS software on this straight off the bat to keep those things squeaky and smooth. So for the most part, I'm alright with the ports and connections, but I think the lack of 10 GBE on the default model of this is a little bit of a jip for me. But for now, let's grab ourselves a screwdriver and open this bad boy up and take a little look about the insides of this big old desktop. So let's get the side of this chassis off. Let's get off of there. I've already removed all the screws. Again, metal all the way around. We're seeing loads of ventilation all the way through this, as you can see, all the way through the top of that chassis. You can see the base of that PSU there at the top. If we go for that first side, got tons of ventilation around each of those drive bays and a whole heap of airflow through there. And you can see that PSU. And if you look just about there at the back, let's move that so you can see it. You should be able to make out those PSU extra connectors there for a graphics card there as well. Now, graphics card support on this system, again, QNAP does support graphics cards on a number of this NASs, although it has been brought to my attention, again, we were talking to some users, over email, again, there's been several over the course of the last 12 months, that the GPU support on the QNAP platform isn't great. There are GPU cards supported, but some aren't supported on the QuTS platform, while some are supported on the QuTS platform. I'm not entirely certain why. And at the same time, the level of support that different graphics cards can give you, some can be used for virtualization, some not so. It's a bit hit and miss. So make sure if you do go for this device and you're planning on upgrading it to have integrated graphics, not integrated graphics, a graphics card, make sure you check the compatibility list of the card first. So, on the top there, we've got, sorry for the banging on the table, we have our first PCIe slot up there. If we go to the other side, we can make out the other two PCIe slots there. Again, 3 PCIe slots, that leads to a whole bunch of upgradability. Now, down here is our big old CPU, and we got to talk about it. That is an Intel Atom. Now, a number of you are going to hear the word Intel Atom and go, ooh, I don't like the sound of that. Yes, and quite a few years ago, Intel kind of dropped the ball a bit on their Atom server class series of CPUs when they had consistent issues, inconsistency issues on their processors that made them effectively fall over, and it did destabilize some people's RAIDs. Now, that was the C2000 series, and that was quite a long time ago. And for users that were looking for something with a little less power hungriness or power consumption, let's be realistic about the old Lecky build compared with a Xeon, but don't want to go for an affordable, efficient, but also not very powerful ARM-based processor like a Realtek or a Marvel or something, this processor, this Intel Atom, the C5125, is an 8-core processor there at 2.8 gigahertz per core. That's all 8 cores, 8 threads. And on CPU benchmark, it's rated at well over 8,600 there. Now, that CPU does not have integrated graphics. What it does have is a great little floating point, and when it comes to when you upgrade this device for multiple network connections down the line, that CPU is going to be able to handle that transmission pretty darn well. Don't get me wrong, it's not quite as beefy as a Xeon, but that's kind of the whole point of this system. Another thing I'll highlight is it arrives with 8 gig of memory, which is good, but 8 gig isn't great for a few reasons, because it supports up to 128, which is magic, but that 8 gig is non-ECC. Now, normally, you may have caught my videos over the last 6 months where I've talked about systems that have got ECC memory, whether you're going to use it or not. When it comes to a system like this, which has got ZFS on board, which is highly prioritizing storage, I would say that 8 gig of memory non-ECC is going to put some users off, and you're going to want to upgrade that memory to more than 8 gig, probably 16 to take advantage of all of the ZFS features, but also that CPU supports ECC memory, but this system still only arrives with non-ECC, perhaps to do with the memory shortages, perhaps to stay within a certain price point. Now, in order to access that memory and a few other extra little things, we're going to have to remove that additional black mounted fan there for the internal cooling system. Now, it's normally held in place with a screw. I've already removed it there. So we can pop that out, pop that on the top, and then inside we can look at the rest of that hardware. First things first, there's that memory, and again, even though it's not ECC memory, at least it's viewed in full form there, and again, you're going to be able to scale to 128, so that's a decent amount of playground for your VMs and stuff like that. Also, it's worth highlighting, again, we've got our M2 NVMe slots there, PCIe Gen 3x2, which is alright, I guess. I mean, again, it's better to have them. You can run the OS from them, you can run certain operations from them, the VM and such, but at the same time, those slots there The real neg there of it being 3x2 means the bandwidth afforded to each of them is 2000 megabytes per second, when a lot of modern generation Gen 3 SSDs can crank out 3000 megs, so they're going to get slightly bottlenecked. Now, you can use those M2s for other things, such as the AI, the Google TPU Coral, those little upgrades to enhance some of the AI services for surveillance, facial recognition, the search parametering tools on this, some of that filing tools as well, which is pretty good. And having those two in there, it's better to have them than not have them, or have to use up a PCIe slot to have them. It's just a shame that they are Gen 3x2 inside there, particularly when we're seeing, again, some of those Gen 4 systems from QNAP over the last 3 or 4 months there. I'm happy with the arrangement, and there's still plenty of cooling and ventilation throughout the system. But overall, I would say, with regards to the internal hardware within this system, I think a lot of you that have looked at beefy Xeon systems may come away just slightly underwhelmed. Me personally, I think for the internal hardware, we're all right. It's just I wish they did more with the external connectivity. As already mentioned, as far as software goes on this, I do not have the storage media currently in the studio to fully pimp this out. And I've already done reviews on QuTS and QTS that are very useful, and they're going to run exactly the same software as this gives you. It's like looking at laptop reviews online. If they're all running Windows, they're all running Windows. You just want to know what's really distinct about this device, and I'll tell you straight away. The range of applications in the QuTS and QTS platform are pretty good. I'm not going to bore you talking about the multimedia apps, because very few of you are going to buy a NAS like this for your home multimedia. But what I will say is that a number of you out there may use a system like this for high intense file processing, whether it is you're a single user environment, a single site environment that's communicating with multiple different locations with this as the main backup of all of those locations, or that you are running multiple cloud services for VMs, or running some of those Google Workspace or Office 365 services with accounts and emails and all of those tools, but you want to make sure that in the event that your internet is severed, that you've still got access to all of those tools. This will allow you this will help you in a number of ways in those circumstances to not only be able to not notice a drop in internet connectivity with all your connected clients, because this NAS will be synchronized with your cloud space and you are synchronizing with it, and therefore in the event of an internet shortage you've still got access to all of that data, and when the internet's back it will resync. But you've got tools like hybrid mount that allows you to bolt on cloud related storage, and I'm talking big S3 bucket blob storage there to the system for you to utilize as if it's local. On top of that, you've got virtual JBoard, which is basically the same thing but in reverse. On top of that, you've got applications like BoxSafe, which allow you to synchronize with those cloud platforms and connect them all in. Again, licenses are included with this. You may need to extend it to several licenses if you're running different accounts. Then you've got things like Hyper Protector and Virtual Machine Manager that allows you to synchronize, export, import virtual machine setups you may already have with VMware or Hyper-V, as well as be able to download VMs directly into the system, which can then all be ran by all your connected clients there, all from the system hardware. You've got backup tools such as Hybrid Backup Sync 3 that allow you to back up NAS to NAS, NAS to USB, NAS to cloud, multiple backup operations, and obviously running multiple Apple Time Machine backups as well. Then on top of that, you've got the utility of a Container Station. Then you've got the utility of Ubuntu Station to run VMs within that. Then you've got multiple file and folder and storage management tools. You've got a dedicated iSCSI manager there within the setup of the system. You've got multiple tools in there to analyze the health of your drives inside. Then you've got utilization of files and folder management on this. Not only have you got your standard file browser manager that can be accessed in a web browser or natively on your own platforms, but on top of that you can use QFinder, which will search system intelligently and very quickly to find specific data for you. QFiling, where you can create intelligently filed records of all of the data inside that are based on file size, file type, file date, and search parameters and more, even right the way down to the documents if you choose. Again, some of that is license led. You've got QVR Pro for surveillance on this with 8 camera licenses, or the slightly more QVR Elite 2 license subscription based platform with the ZFS, which I'm less keen on, let's be straight about that. On top of that, you've got things like QSync that allows you to synchronize your individual Mac and Windows systems with their own respective team folders, that allows people to interact with the NAS with their own native file management software without having to deal with all the NAS stuff in the background. And then you've got a multitude of security applications, because QNAP have come under fire for their security in the last year or so when they were targeted by ransomware attackers Deadbolt. And again, now they've vastly improved a lot of the security parameters on this. The number of things that are disabled by default. The admin account is disabled. The levels of authentication and double check and number of failed logins. Then you've got security scanners and advisors within the system that scan the system with firewall dedicated tools, malware dedicated tools, antivirus dedicated tools there. They're all built into this and all included in that price. I will say though, most users that are going to interact with this, you're going to use your third-party stuff. So don't worry, the QNAP platform, one of the reasons a lot of people like it, and arguably one of the reasons some people don't like it, is because it's trying to support as many different kinds of user as possible, and sometimes that can lead to a slightly more inconsistent software platform when you are utilizing it there. So as long as you've got a little bit more patience, and when you're using the system you don't mind a little bit more of a steeper climb than the likes of Synology, I think it will work for you. But I think now let's summarize this system and say what we like, what we didn't like, and whether it deserves your data. So what do I think of this device? Well, unsurprisingly, I quite like it. I do not think it's perfect, and I think if you are in the market for a high-performance 16-bay solution and you want to go tip-top, then going for this means you're inevitably going to have to hit some upgrades down the line. So if you're in love with the idea of a 16-bay with external connectivity that's high performance, I would recommend going for maybe the 1655 or some of the Xeon powered alternatives to this from QNAP. But that aside, the base level hardware you're getting for $2,000 in the UK at least, it's pretty darn good for as far as I'm concerned. Remember, you were getting a turnkey ZFS-enabled system there with all the benefits that ZFS can bring. I don't quite like that it's only got 8 gig of memory when the bulk of the really interesting applications available, such as inline data deduplication, requires 16 gig of memory to run by default. So this arriving with 8 gig, it's a little bit of a kick in the pants there. I know there are memory shortages, but I'm not wholly in love with that 8 gig minimum off the bat. And yes, the lack of 10 GB annoys me, but I like the fact there's 3 upgrade slots there, which means a tremendous amount of network connectivity as well as upgrade card options are available to me. Upgradability seems to be a real buzzword on this 16-bay, and this is another one of those things that makes it stylized on a rack mount quite comparable, because a lot of the design choices that I'm seeing on this device are the similar ones that I would have seen in rack mounts of the same stature and bay numbers that this is throwing out there. And again, having that huge amount of storage and the combination hard drive and SSD bays on there, a lot of users, particularly again data center users or those that are utilizing this in a mirrored on-prem cache or a network gateway to an existing cloud service, are really going to take advantage of that mixed tier storage environment there. The M2 NVMe bays inside are useful, but being limited to Gen 3 times 2 is a bit of a kick in the bum. I get it, the CPU inside has only got a finite number of lanes to play with, and at least they're Gen 3, but just having 2 M2 NVMe's at 2000 megs a slot when those SSDs are capable of 4 is going to disappoint some people. Now, the CPU, I like it. I know for a few years Intel Atoms were kind of getting a kicking over that business from the 2000, 3000 series, but I think we've moved past that. And for those of you that are looking for a more cost-effective alternative to the likes of an Intel Xeon, and you're not as fussed about integrated graphics, this C5000 processor, the C5125, it's an 8-core, very capable processor there. And if that 8 gig of memory that I mentioned is going to annoy you when you want to take advantage of that 128 gig ECC memory support on a ZFS-powered turnkey solution with this much storage bays on the front, that is something to write home about. It's going to be noisy. It's going to get power hungry at times, but as an alternative to a rack mount equivalent of this for $2,000, it's very hard to question that. And if high scale storage capacity is your concern and you're not overly fussed about using QNAP some software, but you want a platform that's going to integrate and communicate with your existing SaaS and PaaS platform services, this is a very good choice for you. Just bear in mind that it arrives with quite a few necessary upgrades, I would say within the first 1-2 years of ownership. And if those are really important to you, maybe go up the rung a little ladder in the portfolio where there are Xeon and 10GBE enabled solutions like this with more memory as well off the bat. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have in the comments. Again, there should be a full review on this very, very soon. And hopefully we'll be revisiting the testing on this in the few weeks when we have more media to test. So in the meantime, let me know in the comments if there's anything in particular that you want to see me test. On top of that, if you need help with your solution, whether you're a home or a business user, use the free advice section link below over on NAS Compares. It's the big blue button on the right hand side of the page that allows you to get free advice from me and Eddie. Alternatively, ask the NAS community on Ask NAS Compares, where me, Eddie, who does most of the work on there, I'll be straight with you, and other members of the NAS community are there to answer your help and support questions. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. There's links in the description to other related content on this. If you want to support us, there's a donation button, or use the links in the description over to Amazon, where if you use those and anything you buy, and this video has helped you, that would really help me. Anything you buy, we get a kickback of absolutely anything, and it goes directly back into making more content. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.